At Nave Corporation's largest auto exhibition, CEO Rachel Nave glanced at a dusty old Impala and laughed. "That car is junk," she said, loud enough for the cameras. The quiet single dad standing beside it didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He made one phone call to the host and spoke a single sentence that silenced the entire hall. "That car is worth over $100 million. And he wasn't here to show off. He came to reclaim the truth about a woman whose name was erased before she could defend herself. Victor Henriksson had spent 7 years preparing for this moment. He stood beside his 1961 Chevrolet Impala in the premium showcase area of the Nave Auto Exhibition, watching the crowd gather around the gleaming modern vehicles that filled the massive convention center. His car looked out of place among the luxury sports cars and cutting-edge electric vehicles, its chrome slightly dulled by decades of careful preservation, its midnight blue paint showing the gentle patina of age that serious collectors prized above all else. Most people walked past it without a second glance, assuming it was some kind of mistake or perhaps a historical curiosity that had wandered into the wrong section. But Henriksson knew something the crowd did not. This car had carried President John F. Kennedy through the streets of Dallas on that fateful November day in 1963. It had appeared in 17 major American films, from gritty crime dramas to beloved romantic comedies. It was worth more than every other vehicle in this building combined, and he had brought it here for one reason only: to meet the woman whose father had destroyed everything he loved. The single dad had not come here to show off his collection, or network with fellow automobile enthusiasts, or enjoy the spectacle of modern automotive engineering. He had come here for Rachel Nave, the young CEO of Nave Corporation, the woman whose father had murdered his wife and then destroyed her reputation so thoroughly that their son grew up hearing whispers about his mother being a liar and a fraud. For 7 years, Henriksson had tried every legal avenue to clear Eleanor's name. He had hired the best private investigators money could buy, men and women who had worked for federal agencies and international corporations. He had filed lawsuits in 3 different states, each one dismissed on technicalities that seemed designed specifically to protect the Nave family. He had spent millions of dollars fighting against a wall of influence and power that seemed to have no end, no cracks, no weaknesses. Every witness he found suddenly developed amnesia or moved to countries without extradition treaties. Every document he uncovered mysteriously disappeared from courthouse files and law firm archives. Every judge who seemed sympathetic to his case was replaced or reassigned within weeks. 3 months ago, his lawyer had delivered the most devastating news yet. The statute of limitations on criminal charges related to Eleanor's death would expire in exactly 1 year. After that date, even if Henriksson found irrefutable proof of murder and conspiracy, even if he obtained signed confessions from every person involved, no prosecution would be possible. Richard Nav himself had died of a heart attack 4 years ago, but his co-conspirators were still alive, still wealthy, still protected by the empire they had helped build on the foundation of Eleanor's silence. This exhibition was Henriksson's last chance to bring them to justice. Rachel Nave walked through the showcase area surrounded by journalists and investors, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor with the confidence of someone who owned everything she surveyed and expected to own whatever she did not. She was younger than Henriksson expected, perhaps 35 years old, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a practiced smile that suggested she had never been told no in her entire life. Her father had died of a heart attack 4 years ago, leaving her the company and a legacy she wore like armor against a world that constantly questioned whether a woman so young could run an automotive empire. She pointed out features of the latest Nave vehicles with genuine enthusiasm that surprised Henriksson, answered technical questions from journalists with surprising depth, and accepted compliments from investors with gracious nods that somehow managed to seem both humble and entitled at the same time. When she reached the vintage collection section, she stopped in front of the Impala, and her expression shifted from professional interest to confusion to open disdain. She studied the car for a long moment, taking in the slightly dusty exterior, the original chrome that had not been polished to modern showroom standards, the authentic wear patterns that any serious collector would have recognized immediately as signs of genuine historical provenance. "Who approved this piece of junk for the premium showcase?" Rachel asked loudly enough for the surrounding crowd to hear, her voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who had never considered that her words might have consequences. "This looks like something pulled from a salvage yard in rural Alabama. I thought we had standards for this exhibition. Someone needs to explain to me why this eyesore is taking up valuable floor space that could go to actual collectible vehicles." The crowd chuckled nervously, glancing between the dusty car and the tall man standing beside it in a simple gray suit that probably cost more than most of their monthly salaries. Henriksen did not react to the insult. He did not defend his car or explain its history or show any sign that her words had affected him at all. He simply pulled out his phone, made a brief call to a number he had memorized years ago, and waited with the patience of someone who had learned long ago that revenge was best served cold and in public. Within minutes, the exhibition director rushed over, pale-faced and sweating profusely despite the perfectly climate-controlled hall. He whispered frantically to Rachel, whose expression shifted from confusion to dawning horror as she realized what she had done. Henriksen spoke calmly but loud enough for the journalists who had gathered around to hear every word, their recording devices capturing what would become one of the most viral moments of the automotive year. This is the 1961 Chevrolet Impala that carried President John F. Kennedy through the streets of Dallas. It appeared in 17 major American films, including some of the most iconic chase scenes and dramatic moments in cinema history. It has been featured in 3 presidential museums and 2 Smithsonian exhibitions. It is the centerpiece of this exhibition, on loan from my private collection at considerable expense and personal inconvenience, valued at over $100 million by 3 independent appraisers who are considered the foremost authorities on historical automobiles in North America. He paused, looking directly at Rachel with eyes that held 7 years of grief and rage carefully controlled beneath a surface of perfect calm. "And you, the CEO of the company hosting this exhibition, just called it junk." The silence that followed was deafening. Cameras flashed from every direction as photographers captured Rachel's crimson face. Journalists who had been recording casually now thrust their microphones forward, sensing a story that would dominate the evening news and the morning papers and every automotive blog on the internet. Rachel's public relations team would spend weeks trying to control the damage, and they would fail. The single dad had just humiliated the most powerful woman in the automotive industry in front of the entire world, and he had done it without raising his voice or showing a single sign of anger or satisfaction. The trap had been set months ago when he arranged to loan the car to this exhibition, and Rachel had walked directly into it exactly as he had planned. Rachel found Henriksen in the parking garage 2 hours later, after the crowds had dispersed and the damage control teams had begun their futile work, trying to spin the incident as a simple misunderstanding. Her earlier arrogance had been replaced by something closer to genuine embarrassment, though Henriksen suspected she was more concerned about the public relations nightmare than any actual remorse for her behavior. She apologized without making excuses, acknowledging that she had judged the car by its appearance without understanding its history or significance. She said she had been under enormous pressure from the board, that she had been distracted by a dozen other concerns about the exhibition, that she never would have spoken that way if she had known what she was looking at. Henriksen accepted her apology graciously, and something about his calm demeanor seemed to intrigue her, despite everything that had happened. He was not angry or vindictive, despite having every right to be furious. He did not demand public retractions or threaten the lawsuits that his lawyers had probably already begun drafting. He did not gloat about her humiliation or mention how the video of her mistake was already trending on every social media platform. He simply nodded, said mistakes happen to everyone who rushes to judgment, and asked if she would like to join him for coffee sometime to discuss vintage automobiles and perhaps learn more about the collector community she had clearly underestimated. Rachel agreed, partly out of guilt and partly out of genuine curiosity about this strange man who seemed immune to both her power and her shame. Over the following weeks, Rachel pursued Henriksen with increasing interest that surprised even herself. She told herself it was professional curiosity, a desire to repair the damage she had done to her company's reputation among collectors who might never trust Knave Corporation again. She told herself it was strategic networking, building bridges with a wealthy community she had neglected in her focus on mass-market vehicles. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. Victor Henriksen was the first man in years who did not seem impressed by her money or intimidated by her power. He listened when she talked about the loneliness of leadership, about the pressure of living up to her father's legendary legacy, about the isolation that came with being the youngest CEO in the company's history. He asked questions about her dreams and fears, not her quarterly earnings or stock price projections. He remembered small details she mentioned in passing, her favorite flowers and her preference for window seats and the way she took her coffee, and surprised her with thoughtful gestures that showed he actually paid attention to who she was rather than what she represented. The single dad was executing his plan perfectly, though each day made the deception harder to maintain. He needed access to the private archives in Rachel's family estate, documents her father had kept hidden for decades in a study that no one had entered since his death 4 years ago. The only way to reach those archives was through Rachel herself, through earning her trust so completely that she would invite him into the most private spaces of her life. Every dinner at expensive restaurants, every conversation that lasted until the early morning hours, every carefully placed compliment that made her blush and look away, was calculated to draw her closer to trusting him completely. But Rachel was not what he expected. She was not the arrogant heiress he had imagined during years of planning his revenge. She was genuinely lonely, genuinely burdened by expectations she had never asked for, genuinely desperate for someone who saw her as more than a corporate figurine or a target for fortune hunters. She talked about her father with genuine love and admiration, completely unaware of the monster Henriksen knew him to be. 3 months after the exhibition, they became lovers. Henriksen lay awake that first night, watching Rachel sleep beside him, and told himself this changed nothing. He had a mission that was bigger than his feelings. He had a dead wife to vindicate. He had a son who deserved to know his mother was a hero, not the villain the world believed her to be. Falling in love was not part of the plan, and he refused to acknowledge that it might be happening. After a dinner date that lasted until midnight, Henriksen returned home to find the house dark and quiet. Samuel was asleep in his room, watched over by the same nanny who had been with them since Eleanor died 7 years ago, a patient woman who had become more like family than an employee. The single dad stood in the doorway of his son's room, watching the boy sleep in the glow of a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, and felt the familiar ache of grief that never quite went away. No matter how many years passed or how much he tried to fill his life with purpose. Samuel looked so much like Eleanor. The same dark hair, the same determined set of his jaw, even in sleep. The same way he frowned slightly when dreaming, as if solving problems even in his unconscious mind. Rachel's perfume still lingered on Henriksen's jacket, and for a moment he allowed himself to remember what happiness felt like, what it meant to share his life with someone who understood him. Then he walked to his bedroom, collapsed onto the bed, closed his eyes, and immediately Eleanor's face appeared in his memory as vivid as the day she died. He remembered her laugh, the way she threw her head back when something truly amused her. He remembered her determination, the way she refused to abandon a story even when sources dried up and editors lost interest. He remembered the last morning he saw her alive, the way she kissed him goodbye and promised she would be home in time for dinner, not knowing that she would never come home again. Eleanor had been fearless in a way that both terrified and inspired everyone who knew her. She was a financial journalist who specialized in corporate investigations, the kind of reporter who made powerful people nervous with her name alone. She had spent 18 months investigating rumors that Richard Nave, Rachel's father, had bribed senior government officials to secure exclusive military contracts worth billions of dollars. She worked nights and weekends while Henriksen took care of Samuel, following paper trails across 3 continents, cultivating sources who risked their careers and their safety to tell her the truth. She gathered documents that proved systematic corruption at the highest levels of government and industry. She recorded conversations that would have sent executives and politicians to prison for decades. She built an airtight case that would have exposed one of the largest bribery schemes in American corporate history. She was 3 days from publishing her investigation when her car went off a mountain road at 2 a.m. The police ruled it an accident within 48 hours. Brake failure, they said. A tragic coincidence. But Henriksen knew his wife better than anyone alive. Eleanor was meticulous about car maintenance because her own father had died in an accident caused by faulty brakes when she was just 12 years old. She checked her vehicle before every long drive, a habit so ingrained it was almost superstitious. She had driven that mountain road hundreds of times over the years they lived in Colorado. She knew every curve, every dangerous spot, every place where the guardrails were too low or the shoulders too narrow. And 2 days after her death, before Henriksen had even finished planning her funeral, Richard Nave's lawyers launched a coordinated media campaign that destroyed her reputation with surgical precision. They called Eleanor a disgraced journalist who fabricated stories for personal vendettas and professional advancement. They produced witnesses who claimed she had accepted bribes from Nave's competitors to write negative stories. They leaked supposed psychiatric records, suggesting she had been unstable for years. They painted her as a troubled woman whose work could not be trusted, whose sources were imaginary, whose evidence was manufactured. The story was so thorough, so well coordinated, so perfectly timed that no other journalist dared continue her investigation. News editors who had been eager to publish her work suddenly lost interest. Sources who had risked their careers to help her went silent or disappeared entirely. Eleanor was buried with her reputation in ruins, remembered not as a crusader for truth, but as a cautionary tale about journalistic ethics. And Samuel, their son who was only 5 years old when his mother died, grew up hearing whispers in school hallways about his mother being a liar and a fraud. For 7 years, the single dad had fought to clear Eleanor's name while raising Samuel alone. He hired investigators who were bought off or threatened into silence. He filed lawsuits that were dismissed on technicalities by judges who had been appointed by politicians Richard Nave had helped elect. He reached out to journalists who promised to look into the case, and then never returned his calls. The Nava family's influence was everywhere, in the courts, in the media, in the police departments, in the regulatory agencies. Every door Henriksen opened led to another wall. Now, lying in bed after another perfect date with Eleanor's killer's daughter, the single dad faced a truth he had been avoiding for weeks. He was falling in love with Rachel Nave, and he did not know how much longer he could pretend otherwise. Rachel insisted on meeting Samuel after they had been together for 4 months. She wanted to know Henriksen's whole life, she said, not just the carefully curated version he showed her in restaurants and hotel rooms. She wanted to understand who he was as a father, not just as a lover. The single dad resisted at first, telling himself he was protecting his son from the inevitable collapse of this manufactured relationship. But Rachel was persistent. and eventually he relented. The meeting changed everything in ways Henriksen had not anticipated and could not control. Samuel, who had been withdrawn and sullen since his mother's death, opened up to Rachel immediately in a way that shocked his father. She did not treat him like a fragile child who needed to be protected from difficult conversations, or like a prop in his father's romantic life that could be safely ignored. She talked to him about cars with genuine enthusiasm, asking his opinions and listening to his answers as if they mattered. She discussed school and homework without the condescending tone most adults used with children. She asked about the video games he loved, and when Samuel explained the complicated rules and storylines, she paid attention instead of pretending to care while checking her phone. Most remarkably, Rachel asked about Eleanor without the pitying tone other adults used, without the awkward silences or the quick changes of subject that made Samuel feel like his mother was a forbidden topic. She listened to his stories about Eleanor, the real stories that Samuel remembered from before she died, not the lies the media had told afterward. She laughed at the funny memories and looked sad at the poignant ones, and Samuel found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone, not even his father. Within weeks, Rachel became a regular presence in their home in ways that terrified Henriksen with their normalcy and their warmth. She cooked dinners that filled the kitchen with the sounds and smells of a real family gathering, recipes she had learned from her own mother before she passed away. She helped Samuel with his homework at the dining room table, explaining math problems with a patience Henriksen had never managed despite his best efforts, and his genuine love for his son. She took Samuel to baseball games on Saturday afternoons and cheered louder than anyone in the stands, learning the rules as she went because she had never watched a game before meeting them. The house that had felt cold and empty since Eleanor's death suddenly felt alive again in ways Henriksen had forgotten were possible. The single dad would come home from work to find lights on in every room, music playing in the kitchen, his son laughing at something Rachel said. They ate dinner together like a real family, sharing stories about their days and making plans for weekends. They watched movies on the couch with Samuel between them, arguing playfully about which snacks to eat and which films were actually good. They took walks in the evening while the sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold, Samuel running ahead to investigate interesting rocks or chase fireflies while Henriksen and Rachel walked hand in hand behind him. One evening, Henriksen came home late from a business meeting to find Rachel and Samuel in the kitchen, covered in flour and laughing hysterically about a baking disaster that had somehow produced cookies shaped like abstract art. The scene was so domestic, so normal, so exactly what he had imagined his life would look like before Eleanor died, that he had to lean against the doorframe and catch his breath. Rachel looked up and smiled at him, flour on her cheek and happiness in her eyes, and Samuel ran over to show him the misshapen cookies with such excitement that Henriksen felt tears forming behind his eyes. Henriksen watched Rachel read bedtime stories to Samuel, doing different voices for each character the way Eleanor used to do, and felt his carefully constructed walls crumbling with each passing day. This was not supposed to happen. He was supposed to use her as a means to an end, extract the evidence he needed, and disappear from her life before she ever knew what he had really wanted. Instead, he found himself wanting this life to be real. He found himself hoping Rachel would stay forever. He found himself dreading the moment when he would have to betray her and destroy everything they had built together. But he could not abandon his mission, no matter how much his heart wanted him to choose this new happiness over his old grief. Eleanor deserved justice after 7 years of lies that had poisoned her memory. Samuel deserved to know his mother was a hero, not the villain the media had created to protect powerful men from the consequences of their crimes. So the single dad continued his plan, hating himself more with each passing day, waiting for the right moment to access the archives that would prove everything. The opportunity came during a weekend at the Nave estate. Rachel fell asleep early, and Henriksen slipped into her father's study. He found what he was looking for in a hidden safe. Original documents showing payments to government officials, audio recordings that proved corruption, internal memos discussing how to handle the journalist problem. It was everything Eleanor had died trying to expose. But one crucial piece was missing: the financial records that would directly tie Richard Nave to the payments. Rachel discovered the intrusion 2 days later through the security system. The conversation that followed shattered everything. Henriksen told her the truth. His wife was Eleanor Martin. He had approached Rachel specifically to access the archives. Everything between them had started as manipulation. Rachel's first reaction was denial. Her father was a good man. But Henriksen showed her the documents, and the evidence was undeniable. "If you publish this, you will destroy everything my father built," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I cannot live in a world where my father is remembered as a monster." She begged him to stop, to choose their future together over his dead wife's vindication. Rachel made her decision first. She ordered the archives sealed. But Henriksen had anticipated this. He had already sent copies to an independent journalist. The story broke 3 days later. Nav Corporation founder accused of bribery and cover-up in journalist's death. Rachel confronted him one final time. "I trusted you. I loved you. I let you into my life, into Samuel's life, and you used all of it to destroy my family. Was any of it real?" The single dad wanted to tell her he had fallen in love with her despite everything. But what right did he have to claim love after everything he had done? Rachel left without waiting for an answer. The weeks that followed were brutal for everyone involved in the scandal. The media, which had initially celebrated the exposure of corporate corruption, turned on Henriksen with savage intensity when the story became more complicated and more personal. They called him a grave robber, a man who had coldly seduced a grieving daughter to dig up dirt on her dead father. They questioned his motives, his mental stability, his fitness as a parent. Anonymous sources, almost certainly paid by Nav Corporation's crisis management team, suggested he was obsessed with conspiracy theories and had a history of erratic behavior. Talk show hosts debated whether his vendetta was justice or harassment of the dead. Former friends and colleagues were interviewed and asked leading questions designed to make him look unstable and vindictive. The investigation stalled almost immediately because prosecutors struggled to build a case that would survive the army of expensive lawyers the Nave family had retained. Without the financial records directly linking Richard Nave to the bribery payments, the other evidence was circumstantial at best and potentially fabricated at worst, according to the defense attorneys. The witnesses Henriksen had helped identify suddenly developed amnesia or moved to countries without extradition treaties. The statute of limitations continued its relentless countdown toward the anniversary that would make prosecution impossible forever. The single dad sat in his empty house night after night, surrounded by silence and regret, facing the possibility that he had sacrificed everything for nothing. Samuel had stopped asking when Rachel would visit, had stopped talking about the baseball games they had planned to attend together, had retreated back into the sullen silence that had characterized his life before she entered it. The boy was old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, that his father had done something that drove Rachel away, but too young to fully comprehend the impossible choices that adults sometimes had to make. Henriksen watched his son withdraw and wondered if he had made everything worse instead of better. Samuel found his father sitting in the dark one evening, staring at a photograph of Eleanor that had been taken on their wedding day, her smile bright with hope for a future she would never see. The boy sat beside him on the couch without speaking, the way children do when they sense that words are inadequate for the pain in the room. The house was quiet except for the ticking of a clock Eleanor had bought at an antique shop during their honeymoon. After a long silence that seemed to stretch for hours, Samuel asked a question that cut through all of Henriksen's defenses and pretenses. "Dad, did Mom do something bad? Is that why people say those things about her at school? Is that why you are so sad all the time?" Henriksen pulled his son close, feeling the boy's heart beating against his chest, and told him the truth he had been waiting years to share. His mother was a hero who discovered something terrible and tried to tell the world about it, even though powerful people wanted to keep it secret. She died because she refused to stay silent, because she believed that the truth mattered more than her own safety or comfort. The people who say bad things about her are either lying because they were paid to lie, or they believe the lies because they never knew the real Eleanor. Everything Henriksen had done, the years of investigation, the relationship with Rachel, the destruction of the Nerve family's reputation, had been about proving that Eleanor deserved to be remembered as the hero she truly was. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, processing information that would have overwhelmed most adults, his young mind working through implications and meanings. Then he said something that would echo in Henriksen's mind for years to come, words that carried wisdom far beyond his 12 years. "I think Mom would want you to finish what you started, even if it is really hard, even if people say mean things about you, because that is what she would have done, right? She would not have stopped just because it was hard, or because it hurt." Meanwhile, Rachel conducted her own investigation. She spent nights reading through her father's files. What she discovered horrified her. Her father was not the principled businessman she had worshipped. He had built his empire on bribes and the destruction of anyone who challenged him. Eleanor Martin was not his only victim. Henriksen made one final attempt. He went public as the primary witness. Then he went to Rachel to tell her the truth about his feelings. "I started this as a mission. You were supposed to be a means to an end, but I fell in love with you. The dinners, the nights with Samuel, they became the happiest moments since Eleanor died. I know I have no right to say this, but I could not let this end without telling you the truth." He told her about the missing financial records. Then he left, expecting never to see her again. Rachel spent 3 days alone with her decision. She thought about her father, about Eleanor Martin, about Henriksen and Samuel. On the 4th day, she made her choice. She went to the prosecutors carrying documents she had found in a false panel of her father's study, the financial records, the direct proof. She did not do it for Henriksen. She did it because she could not continue living as the guardian of a lie. Eleanor Martin was officially exonerated 6 months later. Richard Nave was posthumously indicted, his co-conspirators arrested. The single dad had achieved what he set out to do. Eleanor's name was cleared. Samuel would grow up knowing his mother was a hero. But Henriksen had lost Rachel. 6 months after the final verdicts were announced, Henriksen stood before Eleanor's grave with Samuel beside him on a crisp autumn morning. The leaves had turned gold and red and orange, carpeting the cemetery in colors that Eleanor had always loved. The headstone had been updated with words that finally told the truth about who she was. Eleanor Martin Henriksen, loving wife and mother, courageous journalist who died for the truth. Her sacrifice was not in vain. Samuel placed flowers on the grave, the same white roses Eleanor had carried at their wedding, and stood in silence for a long moment, finally understanding who his mother really was and what she had given her life to protect. The single dad put his arm around his son and felt something he had not felt in 7 years. Peace. Not happiness exactly, because happiness seemed like too simple a word for feelings this complicated. But peace. The weight he had carried since Eleanor's death, the burning need for justice that had consumed his every waking thought, had finally been lifted. He had done what he promised her he would do on the night she died, when he held her broken body in his arms and swore that the world would know the truth. Now the world knew, Now their son knew. Now he could begin to heal. Rachel resigned as CEO of Knave Corporation the same week the final verdicts were announced, stepping away from the empire her father had built on lies and corruption and the blood of innocent people. The company survived under new leadership, restructured and reformed according to ethical guidelines she helped establish before leaving. But Rachel wanted no part of an organization whose foundations were stained with her father's crimes. She used her inheritance, what remained after the legal settlements and the civil suits filed by Eleanor's family, to establish a foundation supporting investigative journalism around the world. She named it the Eleanor Martin Foundation for Truth in Media, funding reporters who pursued stories others were afraid to tell, protecting whistleblowers who risked everything to expose corruption. It was not redemption exactly, but it was a start. It was the only way she could think of to honor the woman her father had killed. The two of them met one final time at a charity gala 6 months after everything ended, an accidental encounter at an event neither had expected the other to attend. They stood apart from the glittering crowd near a window overlooking the city lights, two people who had destroyed each other and saved each other in equal measure. The distance between them felt both infinite and non-existent, like the space between two stars that had once been part of the same explosion. "Samuel asks about you," Henriksen said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "He still has the baseball glove you bought him. He practices every day in the backyard. Says he wants to be good enough to play when you come to watch." Rachel smiled, but there was sadness in it that would probably never fully fade. "I think about him too. About both of you. More than I probably should, if I am being honest." A long silence followed. There was too much history between them, too much pain and betrayal and complicated love to compress into small talk or neat reconciliation. The music from the gala drifted toward them, something soft and melancholy that seemed to match the mood perfectly. Finally, Rachel asked the question that had haunted her for months, the question she needed answered before she could truly move forward with her life. "Did you ever really love me? Not at the end, when everything was falling apart and we were both drowning, but before, when we were happy, when we felt like a family. Was any of it real? Or was I just fooling myself?" Henriksen looked at her for a long moment, seeing the woman he had set out to destroy and the woman he had fallen in love with, and the woman who had ultimately saved him from becoming as corrupt as her father. "All of it," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion he had spent months trying to suppress. "That was the part I never planned for. I was supposed to use you and walk away without looking back. Instead, I fell in love with you. The dinners, the conversations, the nights with Samuel, they became the happiest moments I have had since Eleanor died. And I have been trying to figure out how to live with that ever since." Rachel nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes that she refused to let fall. "I believe you. And I think, in another life, another universe where we met differently, and there was no history between our families, we could have been happy together. Really, truly happy." She paused, gathering herself. "But not in this one. There is too much between us. Too many ghosts. Too much history that we cannot undo no matter how much we might want to." They did not embrace. They did not make promises about staying in touch or trying again someday. They simply looked at each other one last time, acknowledging what they had lost and what they had gained, and the impossible calculus of love and justice. Rachel walked away first, disappearing into the crowd without looking back. Henriksen watched her go until he could no longer distinguish her from the other guests, then returned to where Samuel was waiting by the coat check with the patient boredom of a 12-year-old at an adult party. "Are you okay, Dad?" the boy asked, studying his father's face with concern beyond his years. The single dad put his arm around his son and pulled him close. "I will be," he said, meaning it for the first time in longer than he could remember. "We both will be." They walked out together, father and son, into an uncertain future that no longer felt quite so dark. Henriksen had lost the woman he loved. He had destroyed a family to save his wife's memory. He had learned that justice and happiness do not always arrive in the same package, that doing the right thing sometimes means losing everything you wanted. But he had also taught Samuel the most important lesson a father could teach: that truth matters, even when it costs everything. That integrity is not about convenience, but about doing what is right when doing what is right is hardest. That some truths are worth any sacrifice, no matter how painful. Eleanor would have been proud of him. She would have been proud of both of them. And in the end, standing under the stars with his son beside him, that was enough. Samuel grew up knowing exactly who his mother was. A hero who died fighting for what was right, when fighting for what was right could have cost her everything. He grew up watching his father sacrifice happiness for truth, comfort for integrity, love for justice. And when Samuel became a man, when he faced his own impossible choices between what was easy and what was right, he would remember what his father taught him. Not through words or lectures or sermons, but through actions. Through the way a single dad stood alone against an empire of lies and refused to back down. Through the way he lost everything and still kept his integrity intact. That was the legacy Victor Henriksen left his son. Not money or power or influence or any of the things the world usually values. Just the simple, devastating, beautiful truth that doing the right thing was worth any cost, even when the cost was everything you loved.